Town Meeting TV is your front row seat to the primary and general elections happening in 2026. On Tuesday, August 11th, it's time to cast your ballot for candidates in the primary election. Then, vote again on Tuesday, November 3rd, in the general election to make your voice heard on the candidates and issues shaping your city or town. Before you vote, learn about what's on your ballot directly from your community's decision makers by watching our election forums. Learn about candidate platforms and other questions you'll see on your ballot. Call in live to ask questions at 802-862-3966. Voting is easy and convenient. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and you can also vote early at your clerk's office or by mail. New to voting or need to register? No problem. Vermont allows same-day voter registration right at your polling place. Once the ballots are cast, join us the following day, Wednesday, August 12th, for a recap of the primary election results. On general election night, November 3rd at 7:30 p.m., join us for Town Meeting TV's live results show. We'll bring you live results, voter voices from the polls, and conversations with newly elected representatives. Watch Town Meeting TV's election coverage on Comcast Channel 1087, Burlington Telecom Channel 17 and 217, or stream it on YouTube at youtube.com/townmeetingtv. For the full forum schedule and more information, visit cctv.org/primary.
Back to you in Studio A.
Hello there. Thanks so much for tuning into Town Meeting TV. What a fun walk down memory lane and all of the election coverage that we've done here over the years. My name is Bobby Lucier. I'm joined by Debbie Ingram. Thanks so much for jumping in today, Debbie.
It's great to be here. It's very interesting.
It's a lot of interesting stuff to cover. So Debbie and I are going to be walking through the results of the Democratic and Republican primary election from yesterday. We have most of the results, almost all the results in, and there's a lot to talk about, a lot to understand about what this means for the general election in November. So thanks so much to you for tuning in and for taking an interest in our local democracy. We're going to get all the way down the ballot into the high bailiff and the House races that didn't have that had a ton of different write-in candidacies this year, Debbie. So we're going to get all the way into the weeds with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our underwriters here at Town Meeting TV for making this program possible. And with that, let's jump in. So we're gonna take a look at the statewide races. Debbie will also get into Chittenden County races as well as the local elections in Burlington, South Burlington, Colchester, Essex Junction, Winooski, Williston. At the highest level, we're mostly looking at Democratic primaries here because that's most of what was on the ballot, the contested races in our area. What was at stake here for the Democratic Party, and what's the state of the Democrats right now in Vermont, Debbie?
The Democrats are still reeling a bit from big losses in 2024, so they were trying to make up some lost ground, I think, yesterday. Their supermajority in the House, they lost that in 2024. It went from 105 to 37 to 87 to 55. And then in the Senate, the Democrats in 2024 went from a 22 to 7 majority to a 16 to 13 majority. So even when you throw in the progressives as part of the Democratic caucus, they definitely lost the supermajorities that they had. So. And then they also lost the lieutenant governor race, and of course they haven't had the governor's position for years now. They do have the other statewide offices that they rely on: Treasurer, Attorney General, Secretary of State, and the Auditor. But there were some important issues that they brought up that they're trying to make gains in. The two really were housing and health care. Housing centered a lot around Act 181, which restructured Act 250. So this whole idea about tiers, though, was soundly rejected by rural constituents. So that was something they had to deal with. And then health care, they've been feuding with the governor about how best to reform that for a long time. The concept of universal primary care has come up, but that's not really going anywhere fast. So Governor Scott again vetoed 17 bills, including a data center bill. So the Democrats are, they have their hands full.
It's true, and we've seen a number of Democrats, including high-ranking Democrats, step down sort of abruptly from their positions, and we saw not just at the leadership level, but across some of the races in the legislature this time around. We have a number of what may be familiar faces for some of the voters in Chittenden County that did not end up on the ballot yesterday, Debbie.
That's right. The Senate lost the President Pro Tem, Phil Baruth, and the House lost the Speaker of the House. They both decided, yeah, that's right, and they both decided not to run. So yes, that's gonna create some big changes also.
Yeah. Also stepping down from the legislature. These are mostly folks in the House, but Mary Catherine Stone, Barbara Rachelson, Phil Pouch, Chloe Tomlinson-Winooski, Tiffany Bloomley, and Kate Logan in Burlington, as well as Leland Morgan and Chris Mattos. That's a lot of folks to be stepping down just in this election. So folks should expect to see new faces in the State House this year. And let's just talk a little bit about the turnout before we get into the election results here. Debbie, we always keep an eye on turnouts, especially in a primary like this. What did we see yesterday?
Well, primaries are notoriously low turnout, so we wanted to look both at the 2024, but that was a presidential election year. So even though it was the primary, turnout was a little bit higher. So it was about 15.25%. Of registered voters, whereas in 2022, which was more like this year, being an off-year election, it was about 20%. Now, if you actually look at what happened yesterday, particularly it varied a good bit across the state, in different parts of the state. So Chittenden County actually was more between 25 and 30% turnout yesterday. And other places like Rutland were, and the Northeast Kingdom were more like 15%. So it's
not too bad.
Not too bad. Yeah.
In Chittenden County, not too bad for a primary, especially compared to 2024, which was a relatively quiet year. We did see more folks come out to the polls yesterday. And one more thing I just want to clarify about the rules for primary elections in Vermont are a little bit wonky. There are a couple of them that we're going to keep an eye on as we go through the results here. Debbie, can you tell us about those?
Yes, and they matter particularly because of, as you mentioned before, especially the Democrats losing people right before the end of the session. There's a party process for nominating candidates after the primary election because, for instance, in some of the districts where, like, Jill Korinsky decided at the very last minute not to run, they hadn't had time to recruit somebody to actually get on the primary ballot. But the party a party committee can nominate somebody and get them on the general election ballot, but they have to do it very quickly. The deadline for that is August 17th. So they only have 6 days to do that. And then the other piece that's kind of interesting is that the legislature created a rule that primary losers, so people who lose in the primary, are disqualified from running in the general election as independents. And that sometimes happen. Actually, that points to kind of the longstanding feud between the progressives and the Democrats, because there was always that sort of loophole that if a progressive didn't beat Democrats in the Democratic primary, that they could enter the general election as an independent. So I think that was the motivation for that.
Yes, although interestingly, we did see the folks who lost yesterday elections are mostly capital D Democrats.
Yes.
And in some cases did lose to those more progressive Democrats who would otherwise maybe have considered a run as a progressive, but now will have the D next to their name, which is a lot easier way to get elected in the general election.
Cuts both ways, doesn't it?
Sure does, doesn't it? So,
right, yeah.
And speaking of progressive candidates who performed well yesterday, Amanda Janoo is the Democratic candidate for governor in Vermont. She is an economist who has spent mostly time working on international issues. She's worked for the United Nations. We'll hear her opening statement from the candidate forum here at Town Meeting TV just a few weeks ago.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Amanda Janoo, and I'm running for governor because I refuse to accept that collapse is inevitable or that the best a governor can do is just manage decline. I'm running because I believe that the choices we make now will determine the course of history. And I know that Vermont can not only weather the storms ahead, but lead this country forward in this moment. As authoritarianism rises and inequality deepens, artificial intelligence transforms our economy and our communities are crushed by a rising cost of living. This isn't a moment for politics as usual. It's a moment that calls for courage and imagination and leadership equal to the challenges we face. I was born and raised in rural Vermont and have spent more than 15 years working as an economist, helping governments across the US and around the world to build stronger, more resilient economies. And everywhere I've worked, I've constantly come back to the same conclusion. The greatest threats we face right now is the concentration of wealth and power. That's why this campaign isn't about gaining power, it's about redistributing it. It's about assuring that every Vermonter is safe and secure in their basic needs so that we can be bold and brave in this moment and use our state power to stop the rise of authoritarianism before it's too late.
That was Amanda Janeau speaking at the Town Meeting TV Candidate Forum. She was up against Allie Richards, who was the CEO of Let's Grow Kids and played a big role in pushing universal child care across the finish line in the Vermont State Legislature. And I think the betting money in a lot of circles was on insider Allie Richards to win that race, but Amanda Janeau is the winner.
Yes, well, I think Democrats are proud that it was a very civil campaign, and that many people said that the party was lucky to have two very intelligent, very capable women. Of course, neither one of them really has any political office experience, but as you say, Allie had more experience in the State House trying to get legislation passed, and then sort of pragmatic on the ground experience. And then, of course, Allie also had, it was a bit controversial towards the end there, she had a super PAC that put in quite a bit of money for ads and texts to support her campaign, and the viewers should remember that super PACs are they're technically independent expenditure only organizations, and so they really, the candidates have nothing to do with them. So that was just something that Allie benefited from, but couldn't control. At any rate, though, that didn't in the end help her. And Amanda Janeau is a very bright young woman. They were both native Vermonters. Amanda has I think a degree in Cambridge, from Cambridge in economics. I think the economy is a big issue right now, so that probably helped her. Also, she used different sorts of language, and talked about real systemic change. She talked about having political imagination, and these kinds of concepts, which you don't often hear in political campaigns. So yeah, this is how it turned out.
It's true, and it was not a landslide by any means. It was a fairly close election here. Amanda Janeau won, and these are preliminary results from the Vermont Secretary of State's website, but just a couple thousand votes statewide in a primary. That is fairly close, but Amanda Janeau, the winner there. And yeah, a lot of money. Debbie, I want to keep a ticker of all of the money spent on losing campaigns in this primary election, because that was the graph that we had shown just earlier. That was over $450,000 raised by Allie Richards' campaign, and then on top of that is an additional $200,000 from a super PAC. Almost all of that money came from outside of Vermont to try and support Allie Richards' campaign, and as you mentioned, not coordinating with her campaign directly, but clearly had a vested interest in her winning, and that is a lot of money down the drain. I read it looks, well, it depends how you look at it, but I would say down the drain.
Yeah, right.
And a lot of that, money going into TV ad buys and media companies working outside of Vermont to try and boost these candidacies, and we saw that it didn't work. We'll see in a couple of other races where a lot of money actually was quite helpful,
right.
In a state Senate race, for example. But That is the result there for Governor Amanda Janneau. And of course, the big question, Debbie, can she beat Phil Scott?
Well, that is the big question, and you know, I mean, based on past performance, it seems unlikely. But as they tell you in the stock market, future returns don't depend always on past performance. So, things can happen. I think Phil Scott's approval rating has decreased. He's really going for a record, and sometimes if you overstay your welcome, you start losing support. But he's certainly always done well, and has won really because he has gotten Democratic crossover votes.
Right.
So it depends on how, and I would say that I think this year actually having a primary for the Democratic Party probably helps them because, in years past now, people who've not been very well known in the party have gotten the nomination, but because they've been the only people willing to run. This time, with a robust primary race, there was a lot of energy, a lot more energy and momentum that I think has probably sparked the Democrats, and maybe that will actually carry over into the general election and give them some energy that they haven't had in the last several cycles.
Interesting also to see a really progressive candidate come out of this primary and not necessarily just being carried by the Burlington area. I'm looking at the Burlington results for governor, and that was pretty close. Allie Richards actually won the city of Burlington, if I'm reading this correctly, had 1,045 votes compared to Amanda Janneau's 1,036, so pretty close. But Amanda Janneau was able to find support in rural areas for her progressive agenda. We'll see how that fares in the general election.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And, really, I think these are trends, we're seeing in other states and, across the country. It's a very interesting time for the Democratic Party to sort of redefine themselves and to tap into this almost despair, but definitely sort of anger and outrage in rural people and working class people who feel like the system has really not been working for them, and some of them turned to Trump, and now they're getting disappointed, and so they're trying to find somebody and some systemic change that's really going to make a difference in their lives, and so I think that we may be seeing some of that in Vermont too.
Absolutely. So Amanda Janneau, the Democratic nominee for governor from Stratford, Vermont. I do have to shout out Stratford Organic Creamery, which is my favorite ice cream in the world. So just as far as, the ice cream, as far as ice cream goes, she's coming from the right place.
That's very important in Vermont anyway.
Sure is. Moving to the lieutenant governor's race, Molly Gray, who had already held this position a few years ago, is looking for her job back, and she got one step closer last night. She won handily in the Democratic primary over Ryan McLaren and Esther Charleston. Let's hear from Molly Gray in Town Meeting TV studios a few weeks ago.
Good evening, everyone. Bobby, thank you. Thank you to everyone tuning in tonight. Esther, Ryan, good to see you again. My name is Molly Gray. I'm proud to be running for Lieutenant Governor. I want to share with folks what I've been up to for the last few years and why I'm seeking this office again. For those of you who don't know, I grew up in Orange County. I'm a proud product of Vermont's education system and have been working the last 20 years as a human rights lawyer and advocate, former Lieutenant Governor. But for the last 3 years, I've been helping to grow and lead an organization called the Vermont Afghan Alliance, helping new refugees move to the state, find housing and jobs. I've also become a mom and have been a caregiver to my mom. And I've seen up close both the cruelty of the Trump administration and the extreme economic pressures facing working families. So tonight, I hope to talk about healthcare, housing, and how the Lieutenant Governor's office can hold the line every single day against unlawful federal action.
That was Molly Gray, who yesterday won the Democratic primary election to be the nominee for the Democrats for lieutenant governor.
She came back like gangbusters. She really did. That's right. Molly had been the lieutenant governor winning in 2020. And then in 2022, she decided to run for higher office. She ran for the U.S. representative slot and lost to Becca Ballant in the Democratic primary there. And as you just heard in the clip, she had some family things going on. She also got married and has been and had a child and has stepchildren, and so and her mom. So she's been doing a lot of things and with her family, and then now she's back. And I was really, frankly, surprised at what a large margin she won by. And that was, I think, the very first race that was called last night. It was just after 8 o'clock.
Yeah, and she was able to raise a lot of money to support her campaign, although not quite as much as Ryan McLaren, yet another candidate here who raised a whole lot of money and was deeply entrenched in the Democratic Party, but it did not help him at the polls. Ryan McLaren, who was a staffer for Peter Welch for a long time, this is his first time actually on the ballot, though, and I think folks expected this one to be a little bit closer, but Molly Gray with over 50,000 votes compared to Ryan McLaren with just over 22,000, and Esther Charleston in third place. So that is a resounding endorsement of Molly Gray.
It certainly is, yes, yeah. And I think, she's not technically the incumbent, the most immediate incumbent, but she is sort of an incumbent, so that does usually help people. Yes, she certainly made the most of it here.
And just to try and figure out what this is saying about the Democratic Party, Debbie, Ryan McLaren was able to raise a lot of money. He's deeply connected in Peter Welch's office. Peter Welch is a very popular Vermont politician statewide, and yet those party connections did not quite serve him. What can we glean from that about the state of the Democrats?
Well, I think it's really fascinating since the primary system started. It used to be that parties chose their nominees kind of in backdoor ways or at conventions or committee meetings. And it really was the party faithful that picked. And so I think those who had volunteered for the party or had paid their dues in the party were more likely to be the nominees. Since we instituted the primary voting system, and in Vermont especially, it's completely open. You don't have to register by party. You just show up at the polls and you get all three ballots and you pick the one you want to vote for. It's much more open. So people who have long-standing ties to the party don't really have a big advantage anymore. And we saw that in Ryan McLaren. We saw that in some of the state Senate races too, where Elaine Haney and Joanna Grossman, who both had quite a lot to do with the party over the years, did not win their races either.
Yeah, that's interesting. We'll get to that in just a moment. Molly Gray is the Democratic candidate now for Lieutenant Governor, going up against the incumbent John Rogers. What are her chances there, you think, Debbie?
Well, John was kind of a newcomer. Actually, he had switched parties. He had served in the Senate for many years as a Democrat and then became a Republican and then decided to run for lieutenant governor. But he defeated David Zuckerman, who had incumbency and a lot of name recognition, and so he's obviously a force to be reckoned with. I think polls have shown that, if the election were held today or something, that Molly would win. But of course, John hasn't even started campaigning yet because he wasn't challenged by anybody in the Republican Party for the primary. So I think it'll be interesting once they actually start going at it and have forums and people get to hear them. John, those rural voters that we talked about before, I think John has made a lot of headway with those folks. He is a person who has made his living off the land and is definitely part of the hunting, fishing culture of Vermont. And and Molly has some of those ties as well. So it'll be very interesting, I think.
Absolutely. And I am just keeping track of money raised and spent in this election. Well, maybe not spent, but at least raised for losing candidates here. I think we're actually over $1 million, and we haven't even gotten past the lieutenant governor's race. So it's a lot of money in this primary election, and you saw there was a little bit more turnout. It was a bigger election than maybe we had seen the last couple of years here in Vermont. Also at the statewide level, a couple other results. Gerald Malloy won the Republican nomination against Mark Koster. Malloy has been on the ballot before, Debbie.
He has run for a variety of different things. He has run for the Senate, and yeah, he's certainly well known in the Republican Party, and I don't think anybody had too much doubt that he would prevail in the primary. But I also don't think too many people are too worried about him taking over for Becca Balint. I think she's had a lot of admiration from a lot of people. She definitely, has parlayed that. Democrats do well when they talk about standing up to Trump. So we'll see. It'll be interesting for Malloy, I think, to try to walk that line. Talking about what kind of Republican he is, and not associating himself with the kind of Republicans that many Vermonters are not too happy with.
It's true. It is always interesting. Vermont, and even though this is less the case recently, has a Republican governor who's often one of the most popular governors in the country, and yet the Republican nominee for the House race is heavily favored to lose to the incumbent Democrat. So there's a lot of ticket splitting happening in Vermont. It's always interesting to try and figure out what is resonating with voters and what draws them to a candidate beyond just the letter next to their name.
For sure.
A few other statewide results to note. We did have Tim Ash, who has been the Deputy Auditor of Accounts for a few years now. This was an open seat, and Tim Ash has won this election pretty handily and will now be the Democratic nominee for Auditor of Accounts.
Yeah, this one was the only down ballot state position that was an open seat, because Doug Hoffer decided not to run again. But as you pointed out, Tim was appointed by Doug as his deputy auditor and has been serving in that position for several years. Yeah, we've shown 3 people there, but actually Dan Toll had decided to drop out. But he still received, I think, like 6,000 votes or something. So people don't always get the news that somebody doesn't decided they didn't want it after all. But at any rate, yeah, Tim won pretty handily.
Be interesting to see. Doug Hoffer had evolved that office quite a bit to become a more public-facing office, and had used it to draw attention to areas of state government that he felt needed a performance evaluation. It'll be interesting to see how Tim Ash, whether or not Tim Ash carries that forward. Also worth noting, some uncontested races. Mike Pichak will be seeking a 3rd term as treasurer, and Charity Clark also is seeking re-election as Vermont's Attorney General. 2 folks that I wouldn't have been that surprised if they might have been considering a run for governor, but heard that Phil Scott was going to run again and said, nope, I'll keep my job for now.
Those are the rumors in the Democratic Party for sure. Yeah, that those 2 would be the ones who have served in high-level offices that would be most likely to run for governor at some point. So we'll have to watch that down the line. I did also want to point out that Sarah Copeland Hansis, the Secretary of State, also was unchallenged, so she will be running again in November too.
Absolutely. Now turning to Chittenden County. We'll take a look at the state's attorney's race. This was a big one. It was on the cover of 7 Days a few weeks ago. Sarah George, the incumbent, was challenged by Bram Kronigfeld, and Sarah George survived the challenge and will be on the ballot in November. Let's hear from Sarah George and her opening statement at our most recent election forum.
My name is Sarah George. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Chittenden County State's Attorney. I've been a prosecutor in Chittenden County for 15 years and the elected state's attorney for 9.5. I've implemented policies and practices that highlight the inherent disparities in our legal system and have sought to make our arrests, our prosecutions, and our sentences more fair. I partner greatly with law enforcement and local nonprofits in order to hold people accountable while also keeping them in our community and connecting them directly with services. And we have a lot more work to do, but we are trending in the right direction. And we have reduced harm in our community while keeping people in our community whenever possible. I look forward to continuing this work. I look forward to your support in this work, and I look forward to our discussion tonight.
This was an interesting and very close primary election, Debbie. Sarah George has been in the office for, I think, 4 years now, I think she's been in for 4 years. I know
that's right, yeah.
she won against Ted Kenney in the primary 4 years ago, but this was a much closer race.
Yes, that's right. It may have been maybe 6 years, but at any rate, she was appointed actually originally by Governor Scott to fill this role, and actually, somewhat ironically, I guess, Bram Cronickfeld thought. Many people thought that Bram would be appointed at that time over her, but the governor appointed her. He did then go on later to appoint Bram to be the state's attorney for Franklin County instead. And so that's, anyway, so they know each other quite well and have similar trajectories, but yes, she has certainly she's gotten some flack over the years. The sort of intersection of drug use, public crime, and homelessness in Burlington, which has affected a lot of the Burlington businesses. Which also plays on how the law enforcement can respond to things. There's been a lot of conversation around this and around how she's handled this in the office over the years. But yes, she has survived the challenge once again.
Right, Sarah George, who is opposed to strategies like cash bail that are common in other parts of the country, refuses to enact cash bail. That was, I think, one of the key differences here. Bram Cronickfeld was interested in essentially keeping more folks incarcerated, and Sarah George taking a more restorative justice approach to the job. So Sarah George will be on the ballot in November. Also, looking at county-wide races in Chittenden County, the sheriff's race was an interesting one here, Debbie.
It was very interesting this year. Dan Gamelin, the current sheriff, the incumbent, ran a spirited campaign being challenged by Kevin Bloom, who is a trans individual and also had very many different ideas about what the sheriff's position is. They focused on the fact that the position in their mind was more administrative and less law enforcement oriented. And so there's quite a lot of interesting food for thought bandied about in this campaign about what the sheriff's office really is.
Well, it is kind of an interesting question. What does the sheriff's office do? And Dan Gamelin, as the incumbent sheriff, has kind of changed and expanded the office through private security contracts. What exactly are sheriff's offices supposed to do in Vermont, Debbie?
Well, it varies from county to county, and the counties are allowed to decide what the sheriff's office will do for them. And traditionally in Chittenden County, they have been the ones to sit at construction sites to make sure that those are secure and safe. They've been the ones to transport people who've been arrested to court or then to prisons if they're sentenced. They've been the ones to carry out eviction notices.
And that was a really important one for this election. Kevin Bloom's, I think, campaign tagline essentially was "Stop Evicting Children," and was drawing attention to the sheriff's role in evicting families and carrying out evictions when families are not able to pay rent. Kevin put forward a vision, a plan for trying to work with families who can't pay rent to figure out other ways to support them without removing them from their housing. It was an interesting race. Kevin Bloom did not quite secure enough votes to unseat Dan Gamelin there, and that was, although a pretty close race given how unconventional of a candidate Kevin Bloom is, with no law enforcement experience whatsoever, and looking to revolutionize the office entirely. Also worth noting that this race did attract some funding as well. Dan Gamelin did raise a good amount of money, much of that from folks who are landlords and own property that they are renting and are ostensibly interested in being able to maintain their ability to rent their properties to who they would like to. So,
yeah, I really think it is notable that Kevin got so many votes, because I think many people kind of dismissed them as not a viable candidate, but they did very respectably.
yeah. And then lastly, at the county level, the high bailiff position. Debbie, can you remind us what the high bailiff
The
is?
high bailiff is, yes, that's a very interesting position also. So the high bailiff basically can step in when the sheriff has a conflict of interest. The high bailiff, if the sheriff, for instance, is accused of corruption or some kind of breaking of the law themselves, the high bailiff is the one who's responsible for arresting them, to making sure that happens. It's kind of an odd throwback to earlier times. But this race became more an opportunity to talk about, about law enforcement in general, and about how we should be treating people, and what the responsibilities are. And so it attracted the person who had been holding it, Johnny Truder, decided not to run again. So there were 5 people who jumped into the race, and so yes, we see there that Amy Payne was the winner. And I think that's quite interesting, because Paul McManus might have seemed to be more the conventional candidate, the one who had closer ties to Dan Gamelin and similar experiences. Amy kind of jumped in. She had more of a social background, social services background, and she jumped into the race, she says, because of Kevin Bloom's comments about let's rethink what we should be doing here. And so she prevailed even when Kevin did not. But I think that's quite interesting.
Absolutely. So countywide, just to recap, Sarah George, the more progressive candidate, securing the state's attorney, Democratic nomination, but Kevin Bloom, the progressive candidate for sheriff, not quite able to unseat the more traditional candidate, Dan Gamelin, and then Amy Payne, the more progressive candidate, was able to. And I should note the high bailiff position is an unpaid position there, but Amy Payne is the candidate there. Let's move into the legislature.
Yes.
Debbie, let's talk about the state Senate, where there are some really interesting open seats. And we have, we'll start with the Central District. This was Phil Baruth's district, and he stepped down. And we have Tanya Vyhovsky and Martine Lerock-Gulick, the incumbents there. And then there was a hard-fought battle for that 3rd seat, and Nikhil Goyal was the winner of that nomination for that 3rd seat. Let's hear from those candidates now.
My name is Tanya Vyhovsky, and I have also served 2 terms in the Senate, as well as 1 term in the House before that. I serve as Vice Chair of the Government Operations Committee, where I work primarily on, it's actually a pretty broad-reaching committee, but we work on elections law, municipal law, police oversight, you name it, anything state government touches, we have a hand in. I also serve on the Judiciary Committee, where I've done a lot of work on sentencing reform, criminal justice reform, juvenile justice reform, really working to try to make our communities safer and our criminal justice system more fair and rehabilitative.
My name is Senator Martine Lerock-Gulick. I am a 2-term senator here in the great state of Vermont, and I'm running for a 3rd term. I serve on the Health and Welfare Committee and the Finance Committee, and in my 1st term I served on Health and Welfare and Education. I have a long history in education. I was a high school teacher for 30 years. I taught here in Vermont as well as overseas. I was on the Burlington School Board for 8 years. My term on that board just recently wrapped up.
My name is Nikhil Goyal. I'm running for Chittenden State Senate in Chittenden Central. Working people are being priced out of our state. We have the highest healthcare costs in the entire country. We have a skyrocketing property taxes and a lack of affordable housing. We really need new leadership that is committed to fighting for working people. And as an educator, as a policymaker, I am fighting for big structural change that will lower costs, fight back against Trump's authoritarianism, and make this a place where all people can afford to live here, thrive, and retire with dignity.
So that was Nikhil Goyal, as well as Martine Lerock-Gulick and Tanya Vyhovsky. Those are the 3 candidates that the Democrats will be sending to the general election in November. So this was an interesting race between folks had really thought it was going to be a race for third between Elaine Haney and Nikhil Goyal, and it turned out that Nikhil Goyal actually was the top vote getter in this race, Debbie.
That's true, yes. And well, this is an interesting district because it covers a good bit of Burlington, but also Essex Junction and Essex Town. And Elaine Haney has a long history there, which may actually not have served her well because there has been controversy there, of course. The merger and then the retraction of the merger may not have helped her because she might have made some people a little upset who are now in that Senate district. Nikhil Goyal is a sociology professor at UVM. He formerly advised Bernie Sanders. So maybe he's more a bit in the mold of Amanda Janoo. Same kind of academic background, a little bit more thinking of you heard him there talking about systemic change and that kind of thing. So that seems to be what voters were going after. And then Elaine also has had ties to the Democratic Party that Nikhil doesn't have. Which we already mentioned, didn't really seem to help much. And then she also ran Emerge Vermont, which is a program that trains Democratic women to run for office. So she's well known, but yeah, so that was a bit of a surprise, actually, to be honest. But
yeah, and one different, you mentioned Nikhil Goyal being a similar candidate to Amanda Janoo in some ways, but one significant difference was Nikhil Goyal's ability to really out-fundraise the other candidates, and particularly Elaine Haney in this race. Nikhil Goyal raised almost $150,000. You look at the statewide, the governor's race, Amanda Janoo only raised about double that, and Nikhil Goyal is just running to represent a handful of towns in Chittenden County and raised $145,000 for this campaign. A lot of that money did come from out of state, so that'll be interesting to keep track of. Who is in Nikhil Goyal's camp and what his priorities are in the Senate as a newcomer.
Yes, yep, it'll be interesting to see, definitely. Yeah.
And then in the other Chittenden County Senate race, this is another interesting one, but we did not have an open seat here. So the incumbents, Keisharam Hinsdale, Thomas Chittenden, and Ginny Lyons will all be seeking another term as Democrats. We'll hear from them now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Thomas Chittenden. I'm running for re-election, but before I do that, I want to offer thanks as well. I just want to say this is my 9th candidate forum with Town Meeting TV, and we just did one 2 nights ago, but I got to say, every campaign I've been in, this is always my favorite for one big reason. Y'all give the questions in advance. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. First time I ran for city council, I was so nervous, but the fact that you gave me questions, I got to prepare in advance, so I really appreciate everything you do. You are the antidote to fake news and the crumbling democracy, so we need more local TV, local coverage, people that we know and trust in the media. Probably used up all my time on that, but I'm running for re-election for a variety of reasons. One of them being the same reason I ran 6 years ago. I want to see more opportunities for current and future generations of Vermonters to be able to live here, stay here, work here, and thrive here.
I've been in the Senate now for a bit, and so I am chair of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee and on Appropriations, and as well as other committees. I'm a Senate leader who listens and collaborates and stays grounded in the daily realities that people face, whether it's healthcare costs, education, climate change, public health, housing, or supporting older Vermonters and working families. My focus really remains on building a stronger, more affordable Vermont where people can thrive. I mean that very sincerely, and I bring a vast amount of experience.
Good evening. I am Senator Keisharam Hinsdale, and I want to echo Senator Lyons' comments about the importance and value of being able to do this and having local public access television and Town Meeting TV. Our democracy won't survive at this point unless we have these kinds of opportunities. And so thank you all for keeping that spirit alive. I serve as the Senate Majority Leader. I also sit on Senate Economic Development, where I was chair and passed 3 landmark housing bills in the last 3 years.
That was Keisharam Hinsdale, Thomas Chittenden, and Ginny Lyons, who will be maintaining their incumbency, at least for now, as Democrats on the November ballot. We do always love here at Town Meeting TV when we have to break out an additional table for our candidate forums, because we have so many folks looking to run for office. That is great. Also, I am glad that we've now split up the Chittenden County Senate district into a few different, so you don't have, you know, six seats and just a bunch of people running. But that is a good sign for our table here, which just does not have quite enough space for all of the folks that are so so dutifully engaged in our democracy. But anyway, those three incumbents were challenged by Joanna Grossman and Elizabeth Ann Hunt, Debbie, and those challenges were ultimately unsuccessful.
Right, and this is the Chittenden Southeast district. So as you pointed out, the big, huge Chittenden district was broken up. So this district is more sort of the, well, should we say the suburbs? No, we can't say that in Vermont, but at any rate, you know what I mean. South Burlington, Williston, Shelburne, Charlotte, those areas.
A little bit more moderate than the Tanya Vyhovsky and Nikhil Goyal in the Central District, being a little bit more progressive. I don't know if they'd fare quite as well in this more moderate district here.
Right, exactly. And as you pointed out, there was no open seat. All three incumbents ran again. And these three incumbents are, they're pretty heavy hitters in the Senate at this point. I mean, Thomas Chittenden's on the Finance Committee, and Keisha Ram Hinsdale is the majority leader, and Jenny Lyons has been chair of a couple of different committees, and now she's been chair of Health and Welfare for several years. She's on the Committee on Committees, which is the little group in the Senate that appoints the senators to their other committees. So yes, they it was pretty brave of anybody to run against them, to be honest. So I think we can admire that. But again, we have the issue of somebody who was very well known in the party, Joanna Grossman, who has run campaigns for other people, who was the Chittenden County Democratic chair, who's been very involved. Who actually came in fifth, and Elizabeth Ann Hunt, whose big push in her campaign was that she is a physician, and since healthcare is such a big issue, she said that she could bring a particular perspective to that. That seemed to work pretty well, actually, because she came in fourth. But anyway, when push came to shove, the incumbents did prevail.
Interesting to see, the dynamic between the incumbency advantage is still quite strong. I don't know if we saw any incumbents booted from their seats in this election, but where there were open seats, we saw progressive candidates perform pretty well, and more establishment Democrats perform maybe a little bit worse than we had expected. So yeah, that Joanna Grossman raised a whole lot of money, and both of those candidates actually raised, I mean, certainly nowhere near Nikhil Goyal's $145,000 at the same size district. Really just can't believe how much money he was able to pull. I mean, these are the kind of numbers you would expect for a state Senate race, and so that was just really an astronomical difference there. But both of those candidates were able to pull together some support, but ultimately not able to unseat these three sort of powerhouse senators at this point that hold quite a lot of sway in the state house, a good amount of sway in the Democratic Party, and are in all likelihood going to be headed back to Montpelier.
Yes.
So that's the Senate, and we'll move now on to the House, which was a trickier arena. We had a bunch of folks, as we mentioned at the top of the hour, who decided not to run again as Democrats. We had as many as 5 or 6 open seats here, and it's still actually not clear in some cases who is going to be on the ballot for the Democrats. And maybe we'll start with Chittenden 14. So Adam Franz ran here. This was Mary Catherine Stone and Barbara Rachelson were the incumbents here, and they both decided not to run. This is the district in downtown Burlington, kind of near like Champlain College. And so Adam Franz is a real big progressive. He's a recent UVM candidate, UVM graduate, and is a member of the Champlain Valley DSA. Is often in found in progressive circles, and so he'll be on the ballot as a Democrat. but there was not another candidate that stepped up to run. And as far as we're aware, there were not any big write-in candidates either here, Debbie. So what happens now with that second seat, and can the Democrats still send someone to the ballot in November?
The county party will need to, well, actually, probably the city party, will need to select a nominee, and they need to get that name in by August 17th, and then that person can be on the ballot.
So that'll be interesting to keep track of. So we are not able to share at this point, although within the next week or so you might hear from the party about who might be on the ballot here. Moving to Chittenden 15, this is another 2-seat district. This is the old north end of Burlington. Brian Chena, the incumbent, is going to be on the ballot again, and Troy Hedrick, who was also who had the Democrats' nomination in the last election, and is also an incumbent. He's now running as an independent.
Yes.
So this one, there was a write-in candidate here, I think, Debbie, but Benjamin Bosley.
Yes, who was registered as a write-in. Yeah.
As a write-in candidate. I actually did run into Benjamin at the polls. He says that he wants Vermont to establish a state bank.
Ah, okay. Well, that is an interesting idea that I've heard before.
An interesting
and it's South Dakota, I believe, is one state that has a state bank.
That's the only other state that, or maybe it's North Dakota. But anyway,
sorry.
So well,
we shouldn't get those confused. Shame on me.
That's Chittenden 15, Brian Chena, and potentially Benjamin Bosley. We don't have the write-in vote counts published yet from the city, but those, in all likelihood, will be the two candidates on the ballot as Democrats, and then Troy Hedrick running as an independent will also be. So that'll be a contested race in November. Chittenden 16, this was Jill Krawinski, the former Speaker of the House, who decided not to run again, as well as Kate Logan, a progressive, but they both decided not to run again. So this is 2 open seats. And love these question marks here on this graphic. So Jeffrey Peterson was the only candidate that actually declared here, but we did have 2 write-in candidates here, Debbie.
That's right. So yes, again, the party just didn't have time to recruit anybody to be on the ballot because Jill and Kate decided kind of at the last minute not to run again. Yeah, very interesting people. Trong Do and Lisa Cannon. They have websites that talk about their experiences in the community, and both of them have been, very interested in the old North End for a long time, and have different, ideas about what they can bring to the State House. So the Secretary of State's website will have these results, so our viewers can tune in and can check that out by 7 p.m. Thursday. Tomorrow.
Yes. So you're seeing now the total amount of write-in votes was somewhere around 400, but we don't actually know the breakdown of those write-in votes quite yet, but we should hear soon. Turning to the new North End, we've got there was an open seat here. Carol Odie is the incumbent who won the nomination again, but we do have a new, this was a contested race for this second seat, and Ali Jiang is going to be on the ballot in November.
Yes, and yes, that second seat, of course, was due to some controversy. Bob Hooper, you may remember, resigned. There were some accusations of sexual harassment, and then the governor appointed Kevin Scully to fill his vacated seat, and that Kevin was not the choice of the party, and so there was a little kerfuffle there between the governor and the party. The governor
not the first time that's happened.
No, it's happening more often though. So yes. So anyway, that seat was, and then Kevin had told the governor actually that he would not run for the seat when he was appointed. So yes, as you said, Carol Odie is the incumbent. She's been reelected. Ali Jiang is well known as a city councilor. And Amy Bailovsky Branch was also running for that, but did not quite get enough votes to get on the ballot.
So Ali Jiang and Carol Odie on the ballot for the Democrats in the new North End. Turning to Winooski, the incumbent Daisy Berbecco is seeking re-election. She won one of these seats nominations, and the other one was contested by Al Turcos and Matt Guile. Thank you, Debbie.
Yeah.
And it actually turned out this was another one where Matt Guile, the challenger, was the leading vote getter here. And Al Turcos, who I believe was on the Winooski City Council for a while.
That's right.
I'm not sure if they still are.
No, they are not.
They're not. Okay. But and this was close, but they were not able to, just by about 60 votes or so there, were not able to get as many votes as incumbent Daisy Berbecco. So Matt Guile and Daisy Berbecco in Winooski.
Right, and Matt, I'm sorry.
Al is on the council.
Al Turcos is still on the council, pardon us. And Matt Guile, I believe, is on the school board in Winooski.
And is also the librarian for the school district. I imagine that.
Yes.
It's a popular position. So that's the Winooski result there, and then we'll also just touch on the Essex District 22. Karen Dolan and Lori Houghton survived a challenge from Matthew Parker Toll, and they will both be on the ballot again in November. I think we had a few other, Lori Houghton and Karen Dolan, both incumbents, and both will be moving on to the general.
That's right, yes, and Lori is actually part of the Democratic team. They're the majority leader in the House, so I'm sure she's pleased to be able to continue in that leadership role.
So there are a couple other races that were uncontested or we didn't quite mention here. Anything else you want to highlight before we wrap up, Debbie?
Sure. So, familiar face Karen Paul from the Burlington City Council is taking over the vacated seat of Tiff Blumley, and will serve with Brian Klepner in that district. So I think that's worth noting. But I also wanted to bring up the fact that, we haven't covered all of the Republican primaries. Most of them were uncontested, but very frequently it has been true that the Democrats have just been able to kind of run rampant in Chittenden County, and they have not been challenged by Republicans in the general election. But that will not be the case definitely this November because there are Republicans who will be challenging Democrats in Colchester, in districts Chittenden 19 to 20, in the Milton Weston area, which is Chittenden Franklin and Chittenden 25, in Essex Junction, which is Chittenden 22, in Essex Town, which is Chittenden 23 and 24, and in Grand Isle Chittenden district. So all of those districts will be watching those in November.
Especially given the 2024 result, the big Republican wave of a couple of years ago. The Republican Party feels like it can put up a good fight with the Democrats, who otherwise, as you mentioned, have had a pretty strong hold on Chittenden County. Wrapping up here, Debbie, I mean, what does the map look like for November? What are the trends we saw across all these elections here?
Well, I think we did see a desire to bring in some new people like Nikhil Goyal and Amanda Janu. We also saw that some of the down ballot statewide races, the kind of tried and true people that have been known, are moving ahead. Like Molly Gray benefited from that, even though she's coming back. But all the other the Secretary of State, the Treasurer, the Attorney General, all of those folks are familiar faces. So Lieutenant Governor and Governor races will be, I think, more of a challenge this year. The Democrats maybe have a little more strength than they've had in the governor's race, and the Lieutenant Governor's race will be almost sort of a battle of two incumbents in a way, with Molly Gray and John Rogers. So
that'll be interesting. You can tune into Town Meeting TV for candidate forums for the general election, which are just coming right up here. My name's Bobby Lucier, and I've been joined by Debbie Ingram. Debbie, thanks so much. Always a pleasure to chat and get into the weeds with you. Thanks.
Definitely is a pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in. You can find more coverage of local democracy and stay tuned at cctv.org/watchtv/elections. And thanks again to our underwriters for making this programming possible. and we hope you have a great evening.